The first thing I noticed was not the shouting outside the bridal suite. It was the sound of the zipper teeth catching, a tiny metallic snag, soft, precise, catastrophic. Slowly, I said before I remembered I was supposed to be panicking. You're catching the beadwork. The hand at my spine stilled. For one absurd second, the room felt smaller than the breath in my chest. My maid had vanished 10 minutes earlier when Carlo's best man burst in white-faced and whispering. My veil lay crooked across a gilt chair. My bouquet had slipped from numb fingers and bled gardenias across the floor. Somewhere down the hall, a woman gasped, then someone else said, in a voice flattened by fear, "Dante Salvator is here." I had never seen Dante Salvator before. Not really. I had seen newspapers with his face, blurred in the background of funerals and charity galas. I had heard my mother mutter his name once, years ago, then cross herself as if she regretted letting it pass her lips. I had heard Carlo say men like Salvator didn't shout because they never had to. Now one of those men stood behind me in the mirror. Tall, dark suit, dark tie, no wasted motion. His left hand held the zipper at the nape of my neck. His right hand kept the lace flat with impossible care. "Your mother S?" he asked. His voice was low enough that I felt it more than heard it. I swallowed. "She made the dress." I finished it. Outside, a door slammed, fast footsteps, somebody cursed in Italian. Dante's eyes met mine in the mirror. They were not warm eyes, they were not cruel either. That would have been easier. Cruelty was simple. His gaze looked like a locked room with the light off inside. "Lift your hair," he said. I did. My hands shook. I hated that he could probably see them. I hated that my body understood fear, even while my mind refused to arrange itself around the shape of this disaster. He drew the zipper up with slow precision. The metal whispered over satin. The beads at my back clicked softly under his knuckles, pearl against pearl. It should not have felt intimate. A zipper, a practical thing. But my whole spine went alert under the care of a stranger, who seemed built entirely out of danger and control. When he finished, he let the zipper pull rest exactly where it belonged and dropped his hand. No drifting touch, no unnecessary pressure. That restraint frightened me more than greed would have. The door opened behind us. A man with a ruined nose and a black coat stepped in without quite meeting Dante's eyes. "It's confirmed," he said. "Carlo's gone." I turned too fast, skirts snarling around my knees. "Gone where?" Neither man answered right away. The ruined-nosed one finally looked at me, not at my face. At the white dress, the veil, the entire humiliating spectacle. "He left through the sacristy entrance 20 minutes ago." 20 minutes. 20 minutes ago, I had been standing still while my cousin pinned my veil, telling myself marriage could be survived if love was not part of the contract. 20 minutes ago, I was still stupid enough to believe I knew what the worst version of this day looked like. "He left me?" I asked. The ruin-nosed man's mouth tightened. Dante answered instead. "He sold you," he said. The room went silent around the sentence. I laughed once, because the alternative was breaking apart so fast I would never fit myself together again. "I think you have me confused with real estate." Dante's gaze moved over my face as if he was measuring the crack that had just formed there. "Carlo Vescari signed papers this morning transferring Bellini Atelier Holdings, your late mother's property shares, and your legal protections through marriage. Once you were married into that family, you would have ceased being useful by tonight." I stared at him. "No," I said, but the word came out thin. "No." Carlo wanted your name on paper," Dante said. "Men like him call that wanting the woman." I looked toward the mirror because I could not bear to look at either of them. My own reflection stared back in white satin and old pearls, like a girl dressed for somebody else's funeral. My mother's dress, my mother's beadwork. My mother, who had died falling down cellar stairs 2 months ago with bruises on both wrists that nobody explained to me properly. Something cold walked down my spine. "You knew," I said softly. "Before today, yes, and you still let me come here." "No," his voice did not change. "I came to stop it." I turned back to him. "By doing what?" That was when he said it. "You're marrying me now. For a second, my body forgot how to move. Even the shouting beyond the walls seemed to recede, as if the church itself leaned in to hear whether I would laugh, slap him, scream, or collapse. I did none of those things. I said, because apparently some doomed part of me still required information. That is not a normal sentence. The ruined-nosed man made a sound in his throat that might have been the beginning of a laugh and the end of his life at the same time. Dante didn't look at him, he only looked at me. No, he said. It is. Why would I do that? Because the papers Carlos signed transfer through an old family covenant tied to the church, the property, and the bride named in the original contract. If you leave unmarried, Vescari still contests the estate, and you stand alone. If you marry me in that chapel before the witnesses downstairs disperse, the claim dies. So does Carlos leverage. You're asking me to marry a man I don't know. I'm informing you the men who did know you planned to bury you under a legal signature before sunset. I should have hated him for the calm in his tone. I almost did, but outside the suite, another burst of noise rose, heavy steps, a sharp order, then sudden silence. The kind silence became when dangerous men obeyed something larger than fear. I pressed one hand to the dressing table to steady myself. The polished wood was cool. My wedding ring, Carlo's ring, sat in its velvet box, untouched. I looked at it and felt nothing. Nothing. That was its own kind of answer. If I say no, I asked. Dante's face did not change. I place you under guard and take you out the back. But then this becomes a war over your body, your mother's work, and whatever Vescari believes she left behind. I can protect you better with my name around you than without it. Around you. Not on you, not over you. The distinction landed where I did not want it to. I looked at the dress in the mirror again. My mother's work. Thousands of hand-sewn pearls. The tiny lily motifs she hid in the beadwork near the waist. She used to say the strongest seam in a garment was the one nobody ever saw. Did my mother know? I whispered. A pause. Yes, Dante said. Not all of it, enough to be frightened. The cold in my spine sharpened. I lifted my chin because if I bowed it, I would cry, and I did not know these men well enough to break in front of them. What happens if I marry you? Dante held my gaze. You live through tonight. That should not have been convincing. It was. The ruined-nosed man crossed himself under his breath as if he, too, understood that something final had just stepped into the room. I looked down once at my hands. They were still shaking. Then I looked back at Dante Salvator, the stranger who had zipped me into my mother's dress, with more care than the man who had asked to wear my future like a purchased suit. Then let's not waste the church, I said. Something in the ruined-nosed man's expression broke into startled disbelief. Dante's eyes altered by less than an inch. Not softness, nothing so generous. But something saw me more sharply than before. Little Stitch, he murmured, almost to himself. What? Move, he said. We're late. He offered me no arm. I was strangely grateful for that. I didn't think I could have borne touching him before the vows. When I reached the door, I stopped, turned. Looked once more at the room where I had almost become someone's disposable asset in white silk and pearls. The bouquet lay on the floor. Gardenias bruised open. I left them there. The old life ended in that room. By the time we reached the Salvator house, my wedding shoes were ruining my feet, and my marriage felt like a rumor told too close to my ear. The ceremony itself had happened in a blur of candle smoke, Latin, and watchful men. Father Benedetto had looked one stroke away from cardiac failure the entire time. Carlo's mother had fainted theatrically in the third pew. Somebody led her out. Somebody else locked the chapel doors again. Dante said his vows as if they were contractual language drafted in steel. I said mine because the church was spinning and because survival had apparently become a sacrament. Then the photographs did not happen. The rice did not happen. The kiss barely happened at all, a brush at my temple, nothing near my mouth, so brief I could almost pretend it had been a benediction instead of a claim. Now, in the back seat of a black sedan that smelled faintly of leather and winter air, I sat beside my new husband and counted the seconds between streetlights. He had not touched me once since the altar. I was beginning to understand that his restraint was not absence. It was architecture. The house rose over the East River in limestone and shadow, too elegant to be called a fortress, and too heavily guarded to be anything else. Iron gates. Cameras nested in discreet corners. Men in dark coats at every threshold pretending not to be armed because everyone already knew they were. The front doors opened before the car fully stopped. Inside, marble, old paintings. The hush of expensive things and older rules. A woman in a charcoal dress stood waiting in the foyer with her hands folded. Mid-50s, silver threaded through black hair, gaze sharp enough to cut fruit. "Giulia Conti," she said, not bothering to smile. "If you bleed on my floors, do it on the runner." I blinked. Behind me, one of Dante's men snorted. Giulia shifted her eyes to him. "Laugh again, Tommaso, and I'll salt your soup." A broad man with kind eyes and a face made for trouble raised both hands. "Signora Conti, I haven't had soup in 3 days. I'm on a discipline plan." "You are on a delusion," she said. For the first time since the bridal suite, I almost smiled. Tommaso Greco noticed and put a hand over his chest like he'd witnessed a miracle. "There, you see, boss, she's human. We were all worried you married a saint, and saints make me nervous." Dante was taking off his gloves. "You should be nervous anyway." "I am," Tommaso said gravely. "That is the foundation of my personality." The line landed so cleanly I laughed before I could stop myself. It came out tired and strange, but real. Dante looked at me, only for a second. Still, something passed across his face so quickly I almost mistrusted it. Not amusement. Awareness, maybe. As if he had marked the sound and filed it where he kept dangerous things. Giulia turned to me. "Your room is prepared." "My room," I repeated, her brows lifted. "Did you expect conjugal optimism on day one?" Tommaso made the sign of the cross. "God continues to love me because I live in this house and still no shame." "Move," Giulia said. She led me upstairs through corridors lined with dark wood and old silence. My dress whispered over the marble runner. My scalp ached from pins. My shoulders ached from holding myself upright through too much. At the top landing, Giulia spoke without turning around. "Do not mistake civility for safety." I slowed. "Is that a warning?" "It is a fact." She opened a door into a bedroom larger than the entire apartment above Bellini Atelier where I had grown up. Cream walls, tall windows, a carved wardrobe, a bed I refused to look at for more than half a second. She stepped inside and lowered her voice. "Dante keeps his word, but his world collects interest. Remember that before you start thinking the suit makes him clean." I met her eyes. "Do you dislike me?" "No." She adjusted the fallen edge of my veil with unexpectedly careful fingers. "I dislike what happened to you. There is a difference." She left me with that. 10 minutes later, after I had peeled off the veil and stared at myself in the mirror long enough to no longer recognize the bride, there was a knock at the door. Not a tap. Not a servant's deferential brush, 3 measured knocks. I opened it to Dante. He stood exactly on the threshold, as if crossing without invitation would mean something he was not willing to spend tonight. His jacket was gone, his tie loosened by half an inch. He looked more dangerous that way, not less. "Your mother's atelier keys," he said, holding them out. I stared. "You took them. I had the premises secured." His hand remained still. "Take them." I did. The metal was cold from his palm. "I need to go there," I said at once. "There are client pieces, the books, the bridal orders." "No." The answer was soft, unarguable. "Those women are expecting dresses." "Those women would prefer dresses to funerals," he said. Anger arrived like heat under my skin. Familiar, usable. "You do not get to lock my life in a drawer because you think you know best." "No," he said again. "I get to keep you alive, while men I've known for 20 years decide whether your name is worth killing for." I hated that he made terror sound administrative. "I'm not one of your shipments." A silence settled between us. I realized a beat too late what I had implied. Dante's jaw shifted once, just once. No, there was something in that single word I couldn't read. Offense, maybe, or memory. I folded my fingers around the keys so hard the teeth dug crescents into my skin. Then stop giving orders like I came in a crate. His eyes moved to my hand. Open it, he said. What? Your fist. I didn't move. His voice lowered. Serafina. It was the first time he'd used my name, not Little Stitch. My name. I opened my hand. The keys had marked me red. Dante stepped one pace into the room, no farther. He took my wrist with careful fingers and turned my palm up. His thumb hovered over the crescents, not touching them. You bruise fast, he said. Congratulations on your observational gifts. Something like disapproval flickered over his face, not because I'd defied him, because I was hurt. Tiny, stupid hurt, and he had noticed anyway. I have 3 rules tonight, he said. I'm thrilled already. His mouth nearly changed. Nearly. 1, you do not leave this floor without an escort. 2, you do not answer unknown calls. 3, if Luca Ferrante tells you to run, you run before you ask why. Who is Luca Ferrante? My consigliere. I don't know what that means in practical terms. It means if I'm not there. His word is mine. I looked at our hands, my wrist in his grip, the pale marks in my palm. And if I refuse all 3 rules, then I spend the night assigning more men to corridors I'd rather leave empty. That sounds like your problem. His eyes lifted to mine. It becomes yours when one of them dies. The sentence landed in me because it did not sound like a threat. It sounded like math. I pulled my hand back. He let me. Are you always this impossible? I asked. No, he said, only when it matters. He turned to go, then stopped at the door without looking back. Dinner in 30 minutes. Giulia will find you something less ceremonial to wear. I stared at his back. And if I don't come down? Then Giulia will bring food here and Tommaso will eat half of it in the hallway while pretending he's protecting the threshold. From somewhere farther down the corridor came Tommaso's offended voice. I heard that, boss. Also, that was one time and the veal was calling to me. Dante walked away. I stood in the doorway, keys in my hand, my pulse still uneven, and listened to the house settle around his absence. The silence here had weight, so did his rules. The next morning I woke to sunlight, disorientation, and the impossible fact that I had slept in the house of a man I married to survive. I lay still for 1 full minute, staring at the ceiling, willing memory to be the thing that had lied. It didn't. My wedding dress hung in the wardrobe inside a muslin cover Giulia must have arranged after I finally let her help me out of it. My mother's pearls rested on the dressing table in a neat coil. On the bedside chair sat a navy sweater, soft trousers, and slippers, none of them mine. There was a note pinned to the sweater in sharp, practical handwriting. Wear these. Eat before you faint. GC I dressed because doing something felt better than dissolving. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled like garlic, espresso, and fresh bread, too alive for the amount of armed men in the house. Giulia stood at a butcher block island cutting figs with surgical precision. Tommaso leaned against the far counter, holding a boiled egg, with the expression of a man being punished by God. This is not breakfast, he said to no one and everyone. This is a cry for help shaped like protein. Giulia didn't look up. You said you wanted discipline. I said I wanted abs, he corrected. Those are different prayers. When he saw me, he brightened visibly. Ah, the bride survives. I owe Luca $20. A man at the far end of the kitchen glanced up from black coffee. He had a scar running from temple to jaw and eyes the color of old steel. 40, he said. Tommaso sighed. This is why organized crime is bad for friendship. Giulia set a plate in front of me, warm ricotta toast, blood orange slices, espresso. Sit, I sat. Tommaso pointed at my breakfast like a prosecutor. See this injustice. She marries the boss once, and suddenly there are oranges. Because she has not spent 15 years lying about portion sizes, Giulia said. I took 1 sip of coffee and nearly cried from relief. Luca Ferrante studied me over the rim of his cup. Boss says you wanted into the atelier. I do. Not today. I set the cup down. Do all of you rehearse the word no in a mirror before I wake up? Tommaso answered first. No, but now that you mention it, I think I'd be excellent at it. Despite myself, I smiled. Giulia caught it and looked faintly satisfied, as if she had plated the expression herself. Luca did not smile. There was a break-in attempt at Bellini Atelier after midnight. The kitchen cooled around the sentence. Was anything taken? I asked. No, then I need to see what they were looking for. Or, Tommaso said, holding up his egg, and I know this is radical. You could remain in the guarded limestone palace while violent men do the idiotic man part. I turned to Luca. What were they looking for? We don't know yet. Yes, you do. My voice had sharpened without permission. Men don't break into a bridal shop after midnight because they've developed a sudden interest in Tool. Luca's gaze did not move. You ask too directly for someone this new. Maybe because no one in this house answers directly. A chair scraped. Dante entered the kitchen. The room changed before he spoke, not dramatically. Worse, subtly, men straightened. Silences aligned themselves. Even Tommaso stood away from the counter as if caught committing a minor theological crime. Dante's gaze moved once across the room and stopped on me. Dark suit, dark overcoat over one arm. No tie today, only the open throat of a white shirt beneath charcoal wool. He looked like Knight dressed for a board meeting. She goes to the atelier, he said. Luca frowned. Dante, she goes with me. No one argued after that. Bellini Atelier sat on Mulberry, 3 narrow floors of brick, leaded glass, and history. My mother had built it from one rented room and a talent for making women feel seen. By the time I was 10, brides came from Long Island, Brooklyn, Jersey, and occasionally places with private jets and women too sad to enjoy them. The front display still held 2 mannequins in lace and silk. The police tape across the side door made me taste metal. Inside, the air carried dust, starch, and the faint rose scent of the pressing room. Home, it hurt at once. My drafting table had been disturbed, drawers half open, tissue paper torn. The fitting platform still held pins from my last client. On the back wall, shelves of archived patterns sat untouched in labeled boxes. I moved toward them instinctively. Dante caught my elbow before I got there. His hand was warm, firm, brief. Wait! For what? He bent, lifted something from the floor near my table and opened his palm. A pearl, one of mine. From yesterday's dress, my throat tightened. They opened the muslin bag, which means they knew the dress mattered. I took the pearl, tiny, luminous. My mother used to call them captive moons. Without thinking, I crossed to the back workroom where the old Singer machines stood beside cutting tables scarred by decades of use. Above them, pinned to the wall, were unfinished pattern sketches in my hand and my mother's. Curves, drapes, bodice notes, tiny measurements like secrets. There, one sketch hung crooked. I stepped closer. The page showed a cathedral train, hand-beaded lilies, side-seam boning notes mine. But on the back, faint under the light, I saw something else. Tiny stitch counts in my mother's older hand, numbers where numbers didn't belong. What is it? Dante asked. I turned the page fully and felt my pulse change. It wasn't just a pattern. It was a ledger, not written, sewn into notation. Stitch counts corresponding to shipments, initials disguised as seam abbreviations, dates hidden in hem allowances. My mother had turned bridal construction into code. I sat down hard on the nearest stool. She knew, I whispered. God, Dante did not crowd me. He stood a foot away, watching the page in my shaking hands. Can you read it? Yes. His stillness sharpened. How much? Enough to know this isn't about dresses. I looked up. She used our archive system. Client initials stand in for doc names. Boning lengths are numbers. She hid transactions in the fitting notes. Tommaso, from the doorway, crossed himself. I knew corsets were evil. For the first time all day, Dante's mouth altered by a fraction. I flipped the page again, faster now, my fingertips remembering her logic because she had trained me in it since I was 12. Not for crime, for preservation, for the precise language of structure. A folded scrap dropped from the patterned tissue to the floor. I picked it up and unfolded it. One line, my mother's hand. Trust the man who knows where the lilies belong. The room went very still. I looked at Dante. His eyes had gone unreadable in a new way. Did you know her? I asked. He answered too slowly, and that was answer enough. Dante he had known Caterina Bellini when he was 15 and still thin with hunger and rage. She used to feed him and Riccardo in the alley behind the shop on Sundays, never asking why two boys came bruised and silent and too proud for charity. Serafina had been a child upstairs, laughing above the cutting room. He had not thought of that sound in years. Now her fingers held the coded page as if it might cut her. He had buried men for less than what Riccardo had done by bringing this family near her door. I watched something shudder behind his face before I could name it. "Tell me," I said. "Not here," he said. That frightened me more than if he had refused. Outside the workroom windows, a car door slammed, then another. Luca's voice snapped from the front of the shop, hard and immediate. "Down!" Dante moved before the word finished. He caught me around the waist and dragged me behind the cutting table as glass exploded across the front showroom. War had finally found the address. The first shot sounded like a chandelier breaking. The second one sounded like the truth. I hit the floor on my knees with Dante's arm locked around me, hard enough to steal breath. Glass rained through the showroom. Somewhere near the front windows, Tommaso swore with operatic sincerity. Luca shouted for the back stair. Giulia would have called them all idiots if she'd been there. The thought was so ordinary it kept me from screaming. "Stay down," Dante said into my hair. Then he was gone, not vanished, moved. Fast, efficient, terrifyingly exact. 1 second he was covering me behind the cutting table. The next he had a gun in his hand and the room bent around the shape of his command. I crawled toward the leg of the table and pressed my back to old oak scarred by scissors and chalk. My heart punched at my ribs. The workroom smelled like dust, cordite, and steam from a press someone had forgotten to switch off. Another shot cracked, then silence. Not safety, the worst silence. The one full of men deciding whether to continue. "Ferrante," Dante called. Left side clear. "Tommaso," alive, insulted, and bleeding artistically. Dante appeared in the doorway again, not breathing hard at all. One smear of blood darkened his knuckles. Not his blood, I thought. I hated that I knew that by instinct now. "We leave," he said. I looked at the shattered front, and the chaos of white mannequins toppled among broken glass. "My mother's archives, already out. How? I do not improvise poorly, little Stitch." He said it low, coldly almost, but the words no longer landed the same way they had in the bridal suite. There was possession in them, yes. There was also the unnerving fact that I felt steadier hearing him say them. He shrugged out of his overcoat and held it toward me. "I'm not cold. It isn't for cold." I took it. Only when he stepped close did I realize my sweater had torn across one shoulder when he dragged me down. My skin was exposed above the strap of my camisole, vulnerable in a room full of armed men and broken glass. Heat rushed to my face, not because I thought any of them were looking. Because Dante had noticed and solved it before I had. I slipped into the coat. It hung heavy and warm around me, lined in cashmere and smelling faintly of cedar, smoke, and winter air. He reached for the zipper. Every nerve in my body woke up. His blood-marked knuckles brushed the fabric once. He flattened the torn edge with the same impossible care he had used on my wedding dress and drew the zipper up to my throat. The metal whispered. My breath stopped halfway. The room, the guns, the shattered glass, all of it receded for one dangerous second. His gaze dropped to the zipper pull resting at the hollow of my throat, then rose to my face. "Better," he said. I couldn't tell whether he meant the coat or me. We left through the back stair into the alley where the winter air slapped color into my skin. Luca moved ahead scanning rooftops. Tommaso emerged from the side door clutching his arm and glaring at the universe. "This shirt was excellent," he said. "Italian cotton. My mother bought it." "If I die dressed like this, tell people I had standards." "You're not dying," Dante said. Tommaso considered him. "Would you say that if it were true?" "No. See," Tommaso said to me. "This is why therapy would help everyone." The laugh that escaped me came out cracked. Still, it came. Dante looked over his shoulder at the sound. The line of his mouth changed by half a degree. Then he turned back to the car. At the house, a doctor stitched Tommaso's arm in the library while he narrated his own survival as if reading from an epic. No anesthesia, he informed me when I hovered in the doorway. I choose to suffer cleanly. It sharpens the spirit, the doctor said. He fainted when I cleaned the wound. I fell into strategic sleep, Tommaso corrected. Even Luca smiled at that, briefly. It altered his scarred face into something almost gentle. By evening, the house had settled into a more dangerous quiet. More men on the grounds, more closed doors. Dante disappeared into meetings I was not invited to. Giulia made me tea I forgot to drink. I stood in the upstairs hall after sunset, staring at the river through a window blackened by night, and finally let myself feel the shape of the morning. Carlo had not merely fled. Men had shot up my mother's shop to reach what she left. I heard Dante before I saw him. Not footsteps exactly. The pressure change of a presence too controlled to announce itself by accident. He stopped beside me at the window, leaving a full foot of space between us. Carlo, I said without turning, was never planning to marry me, was he? No. I looked at the river because I could not look at him and the city at once. Then why the church, why the dress? Why let it get that far? Because they needed your public presence and legal witness before the transfer. Because fear works best when dressed as tradition. A beat. Because men like Riccardo think a woman used to making beauty will not see the machinery under the silk. The name snagged my attention. Riccardo, Dante's silence answered before his words did. Riccardo Valenti, he said, underboss, my oldest friend. I turned. Friend, was. The word had no softness in it, only burial. He knew about me. He knew enough. And you still trusted him? A dangerous question, maybe an unfair one. I asked it anyway. Dante's gaze settled on my face with that dark, still intensity I was beginning to understand as the closest thing he had to honesty. I trusted him for 20 years. The sentence carried more damage than explanation. I folded my arms tighter inside his coat. My mother wrote, "Trust the man who knows where the lilies belong." What does that mean? He looked past me toward the river, jaw set. Your mother used lilies in her hidden work only when the pattern mattered to the dead. She made my sister's communion dress. The world lurched a degree sideways. You had a sister. I had many things. There it was, the past revealed not in speech, but in the shape of what he refused to say next. I watched his profile in the dark window glass. What happened to her? He went completely still. Then very softly, not tonight. The answer should have infuriated me. Instead, it made the silence between us feel crowded with something far older than I understood. Downstairs, Tommaso yelped as Giulia changed his bandage and called her a tyrant in 3 dialects. The sound floated up through the house, absurdly human, absurdly alive. Dante stepped back from the window. Double guard on this floor, he said. No one enters your room without Giulia or me. Or Luca, his eyes returned to mine. Or Luca. It was strange, the way his control worked. He could fill a room without raising his voice. Close off 3 exits with 1 sentence. Make safety sound like a command and intimacy sound like distance. What if I want fresh air? I asked. Open a window, and if I want my old life, grieve it accurately. The words hit so cleanly I almost reeled. He turned to leave. Dante, he stopped. I didn't know what I was asking for until it was out. Thank you for the coat. He looked at me over one shoulder. Keep it. Then he walked away, and the zipper at my throat felt suddenly far too warm. Something had changed in that atelier when he zipped me into his coat with blood on his knuckles and didn't touch a single inch more of me than he had to. I did not have a name for it yet. That made it worse. 2 days later, I found the rest of the ledger inside my own hem, not literally inside the dress I was wearing, inside the shape of my life. Bellini Atelier's archived pattern boxes had been moved to a locked workroom on the 3rd floor of the Salvetter house, and Dante, after 3 separate arguments, 1 accidental alliance with Giulia, and Tommaso loudly testifying that the bride becomes unbearable when intellectually underfed, finally allowed me to work there under guard. It was the closest thing to peace I had felt since the wedding, Bolts of silk lined one wall. My mother's dress forms stood beneath muslin covers like patient ghosts. Luca stayed outside the door pretending he wasn't listening. I spread patterns across the central table and let my hands do what they had always done when my mind threatened mutiny: sort, smooth, align, decode. My mother had built 3 layers into the archive. The public layer, gowns, veils, client notes. The structural layer, stitch counts, seam allowances, internal support. The hidden layer, names disguised as embellishment, dates buried in train lengths, dock schedules disguised as delivery appointments. I understood it because she had raised me inside her logic. Not because she had ever told me the truth. By noon, my head ached and my pulse had settled into a hard, useful rhythm. I found references to warehouse rentals, shell companies, jewelry invoices that were not jewelry invoices. Then I found the name Vescari stitched into a cathedral veil pattern beneath 6 lilies and a pearl border. Under it, a second name, Valenti. I stared until the letters steadied. The door opened. Dante came in alone. He had begun doing that with me, entering rooms without audience, as if privacy were something he could grant in portions. It should not have mattered. It did. "I have something," I said. He crossed to the table, stopping beside me rather than across from me. Close enough that I could smell the cold on his coat, the darker scent underneath. Not cologne exactly. Outside air, cedar, and something metallic the night had left on him. I turned the page toward him. Vescari payments rooted through Valenti fronts. My mother tracked both. His gaze sharpened. "How certain?" "Completely." I tapped the notation. "See this?" She used French seam abbreviations for internal laundering routes. She only did that when she thought the pattern might be copied by outsiders. "You're sure this is her hand?" "Dante." I looked up. I know how my mother dotted an I when she was frightened. For a second neither of us moved. Then he said, quieter, "Tell me everything." So I did, about the hidden codes. About the broken logic of my mother's last weeks. About the night she fell in the cellar after insisting every exterior door be checked twice. About the bruises. About the way she started keeping one particular client file in the freezer because cold kept lies from spreading. I had thought grief made her strange. I hated myself a little for that now. Dante listened without interruption. When I finished, he rested both hands on the table and lowered his head for one beat, like a man receiving a blow he had expected and still disliked. Ricardo visited her twice after Lucia died. The name landed between us like another page turning. "Your sister," I said softly. He nodded once. I wanted to ask again, what happened to her? What Ricardo had to do with it? Why my mother knew enough to hide ledgers in bridal patterns? But his mouth had gone flat with old damage, and I remembered Giulia's warning about interest. This world collected it everywhere. Instead I asked, "What do you need from me?" His eyes lifted. Not what are you willing to do, not stay out of it. Practical need. Maybe that was why he answered immediately. "I need every pattern containing lilies, pearl clusters, or cathedral-length notation by tonight." A beat. "And I need you to tell Luca if anyone approaches you without being sent by me or Giulia. Even if it's Ricardo. Especially if it's Ricardo." The answer came too fast. A small, cold thread tightened in my chest. That evening, after hours of sorting, I found one more thing hidden in the lining of the ruined wedding dress Giulia had finally brought upstairs in a garment bag. Not paper, a veil. I had made it years ago as a student sample, then abandoned it because my mother said it was too honest. Ivory lace over black silk organza, strengthened underneath with nearly invisible hand-stitching. Delicate from the front, armored on the inside. I remembered exactly how I made it. The week after my father's debts surfaced, the month before my mother first started locking windows in daylight. Giulia came in carrying tea and stopped short when she saw it spread across the work table. "That one is beautiful," she said. "It's strange. That too." I ran my fingers over the hidden interior stitches. "The strength is under the lace. You can't see it unless you turn it inside out." Giulia watched my hands, not my face. "That sounds like a Bellini woman." After she left, Tommaso stuck his head through the half-open door holding a plate and the wounded dignity of a saint. Giulia says you forgot dinner. Also, if you tell anyone I brought you cannoli, I will deny it in court. I took the plate despite myself. I thought you were dieting. I am, he lowered his voice. But love has made a coward of me, she made them herself. Giulia, he looked personally offended. No, the Pope, of course Giulia. I laughed, and his expression softened at once. Then he saw the veil. What's that? A failed design. He stepped closer, carefully as though fabric deserved liturgy. No. That's a woman who knows exactly how much weight she can carry before she tears. The remark was so unexpectedly precise, I looked at him differently after that. Tommaso noticed and sighed. People think I'm unserious because I enjoy dessert and fear emotional confrontation. You fear emotional confrontation? I would rather be shot again. You were not shot. You were grazed. Don't erase my history, Serafina. He left me smiling with sugar on my tongue and dread underneath it. Near midnight, a note appeared beneath my door. No signature. Your mother trusted the wrong man first. Don't repeat her mistake. I stared at the words until the paper blurred. Then I carried it downstairs to Dante's office myself. He read it once. Do you know who sent it? I asked. His face gave me nothing. But when he looked toward the dark hall beyond his office, I understood something worse than certainty. He suspected someone inside. And for the first time since I married him, I realized the most dangerous place in New York might not be outside Dante Salvator's walls. It might be within them. War announced itself on a Thursday in the rain. Dante moved me before breakfast. No explanation at first. Just Luca at my door before sunrise, Giulia packing a bag with practical fury, Tommaso complaining that emergency relocation was impossible on an empty stomach. And Dante downstairs in a black coat, speaking into two phones at once, while men crossed the foyer carrying weapons like decisions already made. What happened? I asked the moment he saw me. He ended one call. A dock burned. That is not an answer. It is the beginning of one. He took my bag from Giulia without comment. I noticed absurd things under stress. The way he checked the zipper on the side pocket before handing it to Luca. The way Giulia touched my cheek once and pretended she had not. The way Tommaso stuffed 2 contraband biscotti into his coat and swore he was doing it for morale. For whose morale? Luca asked. Mine, Tommaso said. I am the backbone of this organization. You are a garnish, Giulia muttered. The safe house stood 3 towns north, hidden behind winter-stripped trees and an iron gate that opened only after Luca tapped a code into a keypad disguised as stonework. Inside, it was smaller than Dante's river house and more honest about what it was. Thick walls, reinforced windows, a kitchen too plain for performance. A wood stove radiating dry heat that made the rain smell sharper whenever the door opened. I should have hated the place. Instead, it felt easier to breathe there. No chandeliers, no marble, no grand silence pretending blood had never moved through it. By noon, the storm had worsened. Luca stationed men outside. Tommaso took inventory of the pantry like a grieving widower. There are canned beans, he told me in a voice full of accusation. What have I done to deserve this life? You joined organized crime, I said. He pointed at me. Exactly, I expected cured meats. The laugh escaped before I could stop it. Dante, standing near the window with one hand braced on the sill, turned his head slightly at the sound. He said nothing. But the air altered in the room the way it always did when his attention settled. By late afternoon, the storm had knocked out the main power for 6 seconds, just long enough to remind everyone how quickly structure became fear. The generator caught. Lights returned. No one relaxed. I found Dante in the back study after sunset. He stood over a narrow desk with maps spread beneath his hands. His jacket was off. His holster lay near the lamp. Rain tapped the windows like nails. Do you ever sit? I asked. Yes. When? He looked up. When people stop trying to kill me. That seems inefficient. It is. I shut the study door behind me. My pulse jumped at doing something so ordinary, in a place where every closed door seemed to mean strategy or damage. Luca told me Ricardo's accounts are moving. He talks too much. He talks exactly enough. A pause. Dante nodded once, as if conceding the point to the room rather than to me. Ricardo moved money through 3 dead fronts before dawn. Vescari is panicking. That makes him useful and stupid. And Ricardo, useful and not. I took 2 steps closer to the desk. Not close enough to touch him. Close enough to smell rain in the wool of his shirt and that colder scent beneath it, the one that always seemed to arrive before he did. If he's your oldest friend, why haven't you brought him in already? His hand flattened against the map. Because the moment I move without certainty, he disappears. And if he disappears before I know where he put the rest of your mother's ledger, we lose more than money. Did he kill her? The question came out so quietly, it barely sounded like mine. Dante did not answer at once. Then, with the same terrible economy he used for everything that mattered, he said, I think he ordered the pressure. I don't know if he ordered the fall. Pressure. As if fear were a mechanical force. As if my mother's broken neck could be discussed like leverage in a contract. I gripped the edge of the desk. And I'm supposed to stay here and let you talk about her like a line item. His eyes lifted to mine. No. You're supposed to stay alive long enough to put her truth in the right grave. Something in my face must have given way because his expression changed almost invisibly. Not softness, recognition. He came around the desk, stopped an arm's length away. You should eat, he said. I almost laughed. That is an absurd sentence right now. Maybe. His gaze dropped briefly to my hands on the desk edge. Eat anyway. I hated him for being right often enough to make anger difficult. I made a mistake, I said. His eyes returned to my face. Back at the house, the anonymous note. I swallowed. I showed it to Ricardo first. The silence that followed was so complete I heard the stove settling in the next room. I didn't trust him, I rushed on. Not exactly. He came to the workroom that morning. He said my mother once hemmed his cuffs before a funeral because he was too broken to stand still, and she didn't want him going out wearing grief badly. It sounded true. It sounded specific. I stopped because the rest of it was humiliating. I wanted one person in your world who had known her kindly. Dante looked at me for so long I felt my own pulse in my throat. Then he said, that was a mistake. Not cruel, worse, clean. I stared past him at the rain-streaked glass. I know. Tommaso was hit because Ricardo knew our movements before he should have. The words landed like a slap delivered without lifted hands. My breath caught. Dante must have seen it. Something tightened in his jaw. I'm telling you because I won't lie to keep you comfortable. I didn't ask you to. No, his voice went lower. You asked me not to treat you like cargo. I looked at him then, really looked. At the fatigue he wore too well, at the restraint he built himself out of each hour. At the fact that he could have flayed me with blame and had chosen instead to place the truth exactly where it belonged. Are you angry? I asked. Yes, are you going to forgive me? Not tonight. The honesty hurt. It also steadied me. Rain hit the window harder. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard cracked under Tommaso's weight, followed by his muttered prayer over canned beans. Life continued, vulgar and stubborn. Dante glanced toward the sound, then back to me. Ricardo used your need for the truth. He won't get a second turn. I won't give him one. His gaze dropped to my mouth for one unmistakable second. My whole body went still. That was the first almost of the night. Then a knock hit the study door hard enough to snap the air. Luca opened it without waiting. Movement at the east fence. Dante was already reaching for his holster. Inside, not yet. He turned to me. Bedroom. Lock it. I'm not. Serafina. There are ways a man can say your name that feel like a hand closing around the center of you. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Every other sentence in the room fell away from the shape of that one. I should have argued. Instead I went. The bedroom upstairs was narrow, whitewashed, and cold near the windows. I locked the door and stood in the dark, pulse hammering, listening to the muffled movement of armed men below. Rain, footsteps, one short burst of shouting in Italian, then 2 shots. Silence. Then the knob turned. I backed up fast. My hand closed around the brass lamp base on the nightstand. "It's me," Dante said through the wood. I opened the door. He came in wet from the storm, hair darkened, shirt clinging at the shoulder where rain or blood, I could not tell which, had soaked through. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Is someone dead?" "Yes." The room tilted a little, he noticed. Of course he did. He shut the door behind him and stood there, not touching me, giving me the choice to move or not move. "What do you need?" he asked. The question almost undid me, not because I had an answer. Because nobody in the last week had asked it like the answer mattered. I looked down at the lamp still clutched in my hand, absurd and heavy. My fingers were shaking again. My voice thinned. "I need this to stop feeling like I am the piece that tipped the table." He took the lamp gently from my hand and set it down. Then he did the most dangerous thing he had done yet. He lifted one hand and tucked a damp strand of hair behind my ear. Slowly, as if giving me time to step away. I did not. His fingers stopped at the angle of my jaw, warm, still. "You are not the piece," he said. "You are the reason the table flipped." I looked up at him. The storm moved in his shirt, in his breathing, in the brutal calm he wore over both. "What did I do to you?" I whispered before I could stop myself. Something opened in his face and sealed again. "You held still," he said, "at the church. Everyone else in my world begs, bargains, lies, or trembles. You lifted your hair for a stranger and cared more about your mother's beadwork than your own fear." The room vanished down to the space between us. "That unsettled you?" "Yes." "Why?" His hand fell away. For one terrible second I thought he would answer. Instead he stepped back, one full pace, then another. The distance felt colder than the rain on his shirt. "Because I knew then," he said, "that if I touched you carelessly, I'd never forgive myself." My throat tightened around nothing. He reached for the zipper at my borrowed cardigan where it had twisted crooked near my collarbone, straightened it, drew it up half an inch with precise fingers. The whisper of metal through teeth sounded louder than the storm. Then he let go. That was the second almost. I could feel the place where it had not become more. His eyes stayed on mine a moment too long. A fraction, a crack in marble. Then he turned toward the door. "Sleep if you can, little Stitch." The nickname should have sounded possessive. It didn't. Not anymore. When he left, I pressed my fingers to the warm spot below my ear and understood, with a fresh and miserable clarity, that I was no longer most afraid of Dante Salvator. I was afraid of what happened to me when he stopped himself. War had arrived. Tommaso nearly died on Saturday. Not dramatically. Not in a blaze of bullets with violins swelling behind him. More quietly, more offensively. In a service corridor at the River House. Carrying a bag of blood oranges Giulia had ordered because the bride looks pale. When a man disguised as delivery staff opened a maintenance panel and fired twice. One bullet hit the wall. The second went through Tommaso's side. I heard the shot from upstairs and knew, before anyone said his name, that laughter had just become fragile in my life. The house erupted. Men running. Giulia shouting for towels. Luca cursing into a radio. Dante moving so fast down the corridor that everyone else seemed badly made in comparison. By the time I reached the kitchen threshold, Tommaso was on the floor with one hand pressed to his own shirt and a look of profound insult on his face. "This," he informed the ceiling, "is a terrible week for my digestion." "Shut up," Giulia snapped, dropping to her knees beside him. His blood was bright against the black and white tile. Too bright. Too alive, I froze. Dante turned his head. "Out," the word cracked across the room. "I can help." "Out, Serafina," I should have obeyed. I knew enough by then to recognize the edge in him when fear came dressed as command. But Tommaso's face had gone gray, and Giulia's hands were slick, and there was a field dressing kit open on the table with gauze already disappearing too fast. I moved anyway. "I can sew," I said. Stupid sentence, true sentence. Pressure bandage, packing. I used to help a plastic surgeon fit post-op compression garments. I know how tissue pulls. Luca looked at Dante. Dante looked at me. 2 beats, then he stepped aside. "Clean hands, now." I scrubbed at the sink so hard my knuckles burned. The kitchen smelled like blood, bleach, basil, and panic. Then I knelt beside Giulia and did the only thing I knew to do when the world split under pressure. I worked, pressure where she needed it, folded gauze, additional compression at the entry wound. Told Tommaso to keep talking, because silence would mean something I was not ready to survive. He blinked at me through sweat. If I die, tell Giulia I always loved her ravioli more than I loved myself. Giulia made a sound halfway between a sob and murder. You are not dying because I refuse to have that conversation with your mother. Good, he whispered. She frightens me too. The ambulance the family trusted arrived in 11 minutes that felt like a season. When they carried him out, his eyes found mine once. Don't let them feed me beans in the afterlife, he mumbled. Then he was gone. The house did not calm after that. It hardened. By evening, every corridor held extra men. Dante took calls in 3 languages and broke 1 crystal tumbler in his office. Without seeming to notice, he had done it. Giulia sat at the kitchen table with blood dried on her sleeve and no patience left for anyone's denial. Luca moved like a knife laid flat. I stood in the upstairs hall with Tommaso's joke still lodged in my chest and understood what Giulia had tried to tell me on the first night. This world did not wound politely. It made warmth expensive. At midnight, Dante came to my room, not to stay, not to touch, to place a small leather folder on the writing desk near the window. What is that? I asked. A passport. New name, cash, a key to an apartment in Florence. I stared at him. He stood just inside the door, coat still on, fatigue hollowing the planes of his face into something colder. Luca leaves at dawn with a secure car. It gets you to a private airfield. From there, Rome, then Florence. My heartbeat slowed in a strange, terrible way. You're sending me away. I'm giving you a choice. I looked at the folder again. A real exit, not a trick, not a test that smelled like virtue and ended in obedience. A real door. I thought you said your name protected me better around me than without it. It does. He held my gaze. Until it becomes the reason men shoot kitchen walls and miss your friend by inches. My friend. It was the first time he had called Tommaso anything warmer than an employee. I noticed because of course I did. I noticed everything about him I should not have had room left to notice. I leave, I said slowly, and what happens? You live. And you. His face did not move. That is not the relevant part. Anger rose so fast it almost steadied me. You do not get to decide relevance by yourself. I decide threat, and I decide what kind of life counts as living. Silence. He walked to the window and drew the curtain half an inch aside with 2 fingers, checking the grounds even while we stood in the middle of something that felt more dangerous than gunfire. You saw Tommaso on the floor, he said. Yes. You smelled the blood. Yes. You heard Giulia cry where she thought no one could hear it. My throat tightened. Yes. He let the curtain fall. That is my world, not the polished rooms, not the suits, that. He turned back to me then, and for the first time since I had known him there was no distance in his face at all. Only truth. Brutal and unadorned. If you stay, little Stitch, men like him will keep using anyone near you to reach me. If you go, you lose Bellini Atelier, New York. Every plan you had that still belongs to daylight. If you stay, you choose with open eyes. The words hit like bells, not because they were romantic. Because they were. He was not asking me to stay for him. He was not softening the cost. He was placing the whole knife in my hand and refusing to lie about which side cut deeper. After he left, I sat at the desk until dawn with the passport folder open. The woman in the photo looked like a cousin of mine. Same eyes, better future, Florence, a rented studio, no guards. No gunfire, no Dante standing in doorways like he had learned how to carry ruin without spilling it. Also no Giulia yelling at markets. No Tommaso surviving to complain. No chance of learning the rest of my mother's truth. No chance of choosing anything except escape. At 6:30 Luca knocked once and came in when I answered. He glanced at the packed case, the open passport, my unchanged clothes. Car's ready, I nodded. He picked up the suitcase. We drove in silence to a private airfield in Westchester under a colorless morning sky. Frost silvered the grass beside the runway. The plane sat small and white against the tarmac like an accusation. Luca got out first and came around for my door. I stood there with cold air under my coat and the passport folder in my hand. Behind Luca, the pilot checked his watch. Everything had the awful neatness of a life that could continue without me in it. "Why did you stay with Dante?" I asked suddenly. Luca's scar pulled slightly when he looked at me. "Because once, a long time ago, he dragged me out of a trunk with 2 broken fingers and a promise that nobody would own me again." The wind moved my hair across my mouth. I tasted winter. "And if he becomes the thing he hates," Luca didn't answer quickly, "then someone has to stand close enough to tell him when it happens." I looked at the plane, at the passport, at the future that asked me to survive by cutting out everything that had already changed me. Then I saw, in one ruthless flash, what leaving would cost that staying would not. I would spend the rest of my life wondering whether I had abandoned the only people who had told me the truth while it was still ugly. I thought of Tommaso joking through blood, Giulia's hands shaking over gauze, Dante saying if I touched you carelessly, I'd never forgive myself. I handed Luca the passport. He understood before I spoke. "If I go now," I said, voice unsteady but clear, "I get to be safe by becoming someone who walks away from her dead mother's truth and the living people bleeding because of it." Luca held my gaze. "Yes," I looked past him at the waiting plane, then I turned my back on it. "Take me home," I said. When we reached the car, I tore the false passport in half. By the time we crossed back over the river, I knew 2 things with a certainty that made me cold. Leaving had been possible. Staying was mine. Dante did not thank me for coming back. He looked at the torn passport on the passenger seat beside Luca, looked at me, and said only, "You understand the cost now." Yes, it should not have felt intimate being believed. It did. For 3 days, the house held itself taut around the coming collision. Tommaso survived surgery and woke furious about hospital broth. Giulia visited twice daily and returned with new insults and damp eyes she denied belonged to her. Luca doubled internal clearance. Dante slept, if he slept at all, in 30-minute scraps between calls, meetings, and the kind of silence that made even the guards lower their voices when he passed. I worked. Not because it was safe, because I could not bear uselessness. My mother's ledger opened by inches. A second layer emerged beneath the Vescary fronts. Old church property transfers, shell charities, a warehouse network under Ricardo's quiet supervision. Then, hidden in a train annotation beneath 7 lilies, one date. The date Lucia died. I stared at it until the room narrowed. Ricardo found me there. He stood in the workroom doorway holding 2 coffees like a man with excellent manners and no blood in his history. "You should not be alone," he said. "I'm not," I answered, though Luca had stepped out 3 minutes earlier to take a call. Ricardo smiled faintly. He was handsome the way certain knives were beautiful, slim, polished, made for a hand that knew how to use them. I had noticed that before and disliked myself for it. Today I noticed only the date in my head and the way his face carried no visible grief about it. "You went to the airfield," he said. My hand went still on the pattern page. "Luca talks too much. Luca trusts too little." He set 1 coffee on the table near me. "Dante trusts not at all, makes friendship difficult." I did not touch the cup. Ricardo's gaze dropped to the ledger pages. "Find anything that explains why my oldest friend is destroying half the city." There it was, too light, too curious. A man tapping the floorboards to hear where they sounded hollow. I looked up at him slowly. "My mother kept records of Vescary payments routed through your companies." He did not blink, not once. That was the moment, not the confession, not the gun, the stillness, the absence of surprise so complete it became truth. "Did she?" he said. "Yes," something cold and clean clicked into place inside me. "Did you kill Lucia?" I asked. He was close enough that I saw the answer before he chose the words. The door behind him opened wider. 2 men stepped in, not Luca, not ours. Ricardo sighed almost sadly. I was hoping you'd need another hour. The room did not explode, it narrowed. Every object separate and mercilessly clear. The pin cushion by my elbow, the steam iron cooling near the wall, the pearl-headed pins in a porcelain dish. The untouched coffee, sending up one thin line of heat. You won't leave this room alive if Dante. He won't reach this room in time, Ricardo said. One of the men moved for my wrists. I did the only thing my body knew before fear finished loading. I grabbed the porcelain pin dish and threw it. It shattered against his face. He cursed, stumbling back with 3 pearl pins embedded in his cheek. I snatched the heavy dress shears off the table and slashed at the second man's hand. He lost the gun with a bark of pain. For one glorious half-second, chaos belonged to me. Then Ricardo closed the distance, caught my wrist, and twisted. The shears hit the floor. Pain flashed up my arm. I bit back a cry. His grip tightened. "There it is," he murmured. The little seamstress with teeth. "I hope Dante kills you slowly." Ricardo's expression altered. Not offense, weariness. That is exactly what he would say about me if the positions were reversed. He shoved me toward the door. The corridor outside had already gone wrong. One guard down by the stairwell. Another missing. The air smelled like spent powder and expensive polish. Somewhere farther in the house, a shot cracked, then another. "Move," one of the men snapped. I moved, not because I submitted. Because survival needed time, and time needed feet. They took me through the service lift, down to the garage, then out in a black van that smelled of oil and damp carpet. My wrists were zip-tied. My mouth was free, which meant Ricardo still wanted something said. He sat opposite me as the van pulled into traffic. "Did you love him?" he asked after 5 blocks. I stared at him. That quickly, he shook his head once. "Dante always was efficient by accident." I said nothing. He leaned back against the metal wall. "For what it's worth, I did not want you dead." I wanted the ledger and a clean transfer. Vescari made everything theatrical. "You expect sympathy?" "No." "Understanding, maybe. From the woman you kidnapped, from the woman who chose to return when escape was already in her hand." His eyes narrowed slightly. That interested me. I turned my face toward the narrow van window and watched the city smear by in gray streaks. Under the fear, something harder was waking up. Pattern recognition, construction. Weak points, zip ties at the wrist, loose hem boning in my skirt lining. Pearl pins still hidden in the cuff Giulia repaired yesterday. My heartbeat steadied. If he wanted words, I would give him silence. They took me to the old Vescari bridal warehouse on the west side. Of course they did. Where else would men who sold women as contracts keep their ghosts? The building smelled like mildew, velvet, and cold dust. Broken mannequins leaned in shadows like failed brides. They tied me to a chair in a former fitting room where mirrors lined one wall from waist to ceiling. One fluorescent tube flickered overhead, turning everything sickly white. Ricardo stood in the doorway while his men checked the hall. "You know Dante will burn the city to get here," I said. "Yes, he'll kill you." A pause. "Probably." The answer was so bare it unsettled me more than denial would have. "Then why?" I asked. He looked at the ruined mirrors instead of me. "Because once he and I were the same boy." Then he decided grief made him noble, and I decided grief made me honest. The sentence sat there, gray and cracked. Villain mirror, I saw it then, not because I wanted to understand him. Because Dante had once been one decision away from this exact shape of manhood. Elegant, exhausted, convinced tenderness was the first and stupidest mistake. Ricardo came closer and crouched in front of me. "Your mother knew too much," he said. "Lucia knew worse. Dante still thinks I gave the order only after the church transfer. He has never understood that I learned earlier than he did how families survive." "You mean how cowards do?" A faint smile, real this time. "There. That's why he likes you." He stood and nodded to the guard in the hall. "Give her 10 minutes, then call him." When he left, the room got colder. I waited until the outer door shut. Then I bent both wrists hard against the side rung of the chair and worked one pearl pin loose from the cuff seam with my thumbnail. My mother had taught me when I was 13 that every fitted garment carried a hidden mercy if the maker cared enough to put one there. I had cared. The pin dropped into my palm. I twisted, found the lock edge of the zip tie, and began to work. Outside, footsteps passed once, twice. The fluorescent light buzzed above me like a fly trapped in glass. My hands shook. I kept going. Across the mirror, my own face stared back pale and hard and nothing like a bride. The tie gave by half a tooth. Then the warehouse phone rang somewhere down the hall. And I knew, before anyone answered it, that Dante had finally been told where to find me. Too Late was moving toward us both. The zip tie gave away one tooth at a time. Pain burned through my fingers. Sweat slid cold down my spine. The fluorescent tube above me buzzed and buzzed, throwing my reflection back in slices across the ruined mirrors. Pale face, wedding-trained posture even now. My mother would have called that a bad habit. Stand softer, Fina. The world is always looking for the shape of where to break you. The first loop snapped. I kept my face arranged for fear. The second wrist came free faster. I pulled the pearl pin from the cuff seam and tucked it into my palm just as the outer door opened. A guard stepped in, bored and armed, with a phone in one hand. "He wants you alive," he said. "Don't make this dramatic." I lowered my eyes and let my shoulders shake. Men like him trusted weakness because they mistook it for surrender. He came close enough to cut the remaining tie from the chair arm. I drove the pearl pin into the soft skin between his thumb and forefinger. He cursed, gun dropping sideways. I kicked the chair back into his knees, lunged for the fallen weapon, missed it, and caught only the metal leg of a rolling dress form. He grabbed my hair. I twisted, blind with pain, and slammed the dress form base into his shin. Bone rang. He folded with a strangled sound. I ran. The hallway outside stank of damp velvet and old plaster. To my left, loading bay. To my right, showroom. I chose right because brides had always understood something criminals didn't. The front of a house taught you how it wanted to be seen, and the back taught you where it was weakest. A second man appeared at the end of the corridor. I ducked into the sample room. Dusty gowns hung in rows beneath plastic. Broken mannequins stood headless in the corners. There was an industrial steamer by the wall, a pressing table, and 3 full racks of lace samples older than I was. My breath came fast. My hands moved faster. I slammed the steamer valve open. Hot vapor burst into the room with a shriek. When the door flew inward, I shoved the rolling rack hard. Silk, tool, and metal crashed into the guard with enough force to throw off his aim. His shot buried itself in the ceiling. Steam engulfed us both. I snatched the steamer hose and drove it toward his face. He howled, dropping the gun to shield his eyes. I kicked it under a rack and ran again. This time I made it to the main showroom. The old Vescary display floor opened around me in cracked marble and dead mirrors. A bridal platform stood in the center, under a ruined chandelier. For one insane second, I saw the place as it must once have been, girls in pins and silk, mothers pretending not to cry, saleswomen lying gently about alterations and forever. Then footsteps thundered behind me. "Serafina!" "Ricardo." I turned. He stood at the far archway with a gun in one hand and weariness in his face so deep it almost looked like grief. Almost. "You should have taken Florence," he said. "You should have learned the difference between loyalty and ownership." A tiny smile touched his mouth. "That sounds like Dante." "No," I said. "That sounds like my mother." Something flickered in his expression. Not remorse. Memory. He took another step. "You think he's different from me because he learned to hold still in expensive rooms. He is. He just found a prettier altar." I backed toward the bridal platform because I needed space, because I had one pearl pin and no gun, because survival sometimes looked embarrassingly like retreat. Then I heard it, outside, somewhere near the loading bay, Tommaso's voice, ragged and furious and unmistakably alive. "I swear to God, if I get shot twice in 1 week, I'm billing everyone." Relief hit me so hard my knees nearly gave. Ricardo heard it too, his face cooled. The outer doors crashed open, shouting. Running steps, a burst of gunfire. Then Luca's voice, hard as iron, calling clear right, flank the stairs. Dante did not shout. He entered the room like the silence before a storm breaks. Dark coat. Gun low at his side, rein on his shoulders, eyes fixed only on me, he saw the pin in my hand, saw the steam still hissing from the sample room, saw that I was standing. Something violent moved behind his face and sealed itself away. "Little Stitch," he said. It was barely more than breath. Ricardo pressed the gun against my temple before Dante could take another step. "Stop there." Dante stopped. The whole room stopped with him. "Let her go," he said. Ricardo laughed once without humor. "You know that isn't how this ends." "No," Dante said. "I know exactly how it ends." I should have been afraid of the gun at my head. I was. But what I felt more sharply was Dante's attention on the space between us, absolute and unbearable. Ricardo's hand tightened in my hair. "Tell her about Lucia." Dante's jaw set. I felt the air change, not because of what I knew, because of what he hadn't said. Ricardo's voice stayed calm. "Tell her your sister begged you to help her run before the Covenant wedding. Tell her you told her to wait one night, Dante, because you thought you could fix it cleanly." The words landed like broken glass. Dante did not deny them. "I was too late," he said. No defense, no excuse, just the blade. Ricardo looked at me. "That is the difference between him and me, Serafina. He still thinks delay is not a decision." The gun shifted half an inch as he turned his head. That was all I needed. I drove the pearl pin backward into his wrist with everything I had. He fired. The shot shattered mirror. Dante moved. So did I. I dropped hard, twisted out of Ricardo's grip, and hit the marble on one shoulder. Luca's return fire cracked overhead. Men shouted. One body fell. Ricardo disappeared behind the central platform as Dante came for me in 3 impossible strides. His hands were on me, arms, face, hair, checking. "Are you hit?" "I don't think so." "Don't think. I'm not hit." Only then did he breathe. For one suspended second, he looked down at me with all his restraint gone and nowhere to put it. Then his hand closed at the back of my neck and he kissed me. Not carefully, not cleanly, like relief had teeth. I made a sound I did not know belonged to me and caught his coat in both fists. The room, the gunfire, the broken mirrors, all of it fell away under the terrible fact of his mouth on mine, and the way he pulled back before hunger could become theft. Forehead to mine, he said, "Stay behind Luca." A fresh shot cracked from the stairwell. Ricardo's voice came from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. "Midnight, St. Bartholomew's crypt. Bring the Bellini pages if you want the rest of the truth." Then nothing. By the time Luca's men swept the back corridor, he was gone. Tommaso appeared in the doorway pale as plaster, one arm still strapped from surgery, and a bulletproof vest hanging crooked over his shirt. I stared at him. "What are you doing here?" "Heroism," he said, offended. "Also logistics. They used an old Vescari-produced route, and apparently I'm the only one in this family who respects invoices." Luca muttered. He climbed out of a hospital bed. Tommaso adjusted the vest with wounded pride. "A dramatic recovery has been essential to my brand." Dante helped me stand, but did not let go of my hand until we reached the car. Only there, with rain needling the windshield and St. Bartholomew's name still lodged in the air between us, did I understand what Ricardo had done. He hadn't invited us. He had chosen the place Dante had failed once already. And when Dante looked at me across the dark car, I knew he understood it too. One of us might not come back from that crypt. St. Bartholomew sat 3 blocks from the East River behind an iron fence and a row of winterbear yews. By daylight it was beautiful in the exhausted way old churches often were, stone gone soft at the edges, stained glass holding color against soot. History pretending holiness had always outweighed power. At midnight it looked like a confession no one survived. Rain had stopped. The city shone black and wet. Dante's car idled 1 street over with the headlights off. Luca checked weapons under the dim dash light. Tommaso sat in the back seat wearing borrowed body armor and an expression of pious self-pity. "If I die in a crypt," he said, "tell Giulia I wanted something less gothic." "No one asked you to come," Luca said. "Yes, but if I stayed home I'd worry alone, and that seemed unhealthy." I looked at him over my shoulder. Your doctor definitely forbade this. My doctor lacks imagination. Despite everything, I smiled. Dante saw it. His hand, resting between us on the seat, turned slightly palm up. Not a demand. Not even an invitation. A place. I set my fingers in his. He closed them once, then let go and got out of the car. We entered through a side vestry, door Father Benedetto had once used for wedding rehearsals and secret meetings neither category had deserved. The air inside was cold with incense, damp stone, and the metallic whisper of old keys. My shoes made almost no sound on the runner. Dante moved beside me like the church belonged to his shadow. Below the sanctuary, the crypt opened in narrow aisles lined with family vaults and document cabinets from the old covenant days. Marriage contracts, property transfers. The legal bones of men who believed God loved ownership when it wore Latin. My mother had written about this place in code beneath 7 lilies, not because she feared it, because she wanted it found. The third cabinet on the north wall, I whispered. She hid the last ledger inside the false spine. Ricardo stepped out from behind a pillar before I could take the next breath. He was alone. For one irrational second, that frightened me more than if he'd brought 20 men. Always the Bellini girl with the answer, he said. Dante moved half a step in front of me. Ricardo's gaze flicked to that motion and almost softened. There you are, the boy who still stands in front of the thing he can't afford to lose. You should have run, Dante said. I did that once. Ricardo looked toward the far wall where candle stubs guttered in red glass. It bored me. Luca and 2 men fanned left. Tommaso stayed by the stair with his gun held like a moral compromise. I could feel the whole crypt listening. Ricardo nodded toward the cabinet wall. Go on, Serafina. Find what your mother died to keep. I should have known better than to move, but he wanted the ledger visible. Dante needed the proof. And some stubborn part of me could not bear the thought of leaving my mother's last work in the mouth of this place. I went to the north wall, third cabinet, false spine. My fingers slid over ledger titles stamped in cracked gold until I found the one with the loosened leather edge. I pulled. The compartment opened. Inside lay a narrow oilskin packet and a rosary wrapped around it. Lucia's name was engraved on the small silver cross. Dante saw it and went completely still. Ricardo spoke into that silence. She gave that to me the night you told her to wait. I turned. No one moved. She was carrying your nephew, Ricardo said quietly. Did you know that? The crypt tilted. Dante's face lost all color without changing shape. No, Ricardo echoed, because I never told you. Because once I saw what the family would do if she fled, I chose the version that kept the machine intact. I gave her back to her husband. I told myself I was saving us all. Tommaso swore under his breath. Luca's gun rose another inch. Ricardo's eyes stayed on Dante. And when she died on those stairs, I understood something you never did. We were built by men who traded daughters for stability. You wanted to break the covenant. I wanted to inherit it. There it was, the mirror finally whole, not evil for the pleasure of it. Only a man who had mistaken structure for survival, until blood taught him otherwise, and then taught him nothing more. Dante's voice came out low and stripped bare. You killed her. I chose the system that killed her. That's the same thing. Yes, Ricardo said. Now it is. A shot cracked from the upper stair. Everything broke open. Ricardo's backup poured into the crypt from both access points. Dante shoved me behind the cabinet bank as gunfire exploded through stone and echo. Luca returned fire at once. One of Ricardo's men dropped across the chapel steps. Tommaso, from somewhere near the stairwell, shouted, I hate group projects, and fired wildly enough to make one attacker duck. The oilskin packet hit the floor at my feet. I snatched it up and crawled lower as bullets chipped stone overhead. Dante moved through the aisle with cold, murderous precision, not wasting a single shot. Luca took one man through the shoulder and another through the throat. Ricardo vanished behind a vault pillar and reappeared closer to Dante. Then Luca staggered. A bullet had gone into his side just beneath the vest seam. He stayed up anyway. Luca, I started. Stay down, he snapped. Ricardo saw the opening and raised his gun toward Dante's unguarded flank. I didn't think, I moved. There was a rack of ceremonial drapery poles stacked against the wall beside me, brass-tipped and long as spear shafts. I grabbed the nearest one, came up from behind the cabinet, and drove it hard between Ricardo's knees just as he fired. The shot went wide. Dante turned. For one awful second, the two men who had once been boys in the same alley simply looked at each other. Then Dante shot him once in the chest. Ricardo hit the stone but did not die immediately. Dante crossed the aisle and stood over him. I saw the choice arrive in his face. Mercy, law, memory, nothing clean among them. Ricardo coughed blood and laughed once. You see. We were always the same. Dante lowered the gun, not away, to center. No, he said. The second shot ended it. After that, the crypt kept echoing for too long. Luca slid down the wall before I reached him. His hands were red, not enough red to mean immediate death, too much to mean anything kind. I knelt beside him, pressing my scarf to the wound, while Dante called for the medic team already moving in from above. Luca looked at me with that dry, scar-pulled half-expression that always meant he was in more pain than he would name. You hit him with church furniture. It was drapery hardware. Better. His eyes lifted past me to Dante. Boss. Dante crouched on his other side. Luca's breathing hitched once. Tell her when you're lying to keep her safe. She's bad at forgiving silence. Dante's throat moved. Save your strength. No. Luca's gaze shifted back to me. He'll try to carry everything alone. Don't let him. Then the medics were on him, cutting cloth, packing wounds, lifting him onto a stretcher. Alive. Barely, but alive. I stayed on the floor until Dante touched my shoulder. When I looked up, he held Lucia's rosary in one hand and the oilskin packet in the other. The old covenant records still lined the walls around us. Generations of legal cruelty bound in calfskin and velvet. Dante walked to the center of the crypt, opened the oilskin, and removed my mother's final pages. Then he struck a match. I watched him set the old covenant registry alight. Leather caught slowly, then greedily. Fire licked through the ledgers of marriages bought, daughters traded, names transferred like property. The smell of smoke and old paper rose toward the chapel above. He stood there until flame made gold ash of the system that had nearly buried us both. When he came back to me, his face looked older and cleaner at the same time. I took his hand to stand. Above us, sirens approached the church. Below us, the last of the old world burned. Dante looked once at the flames, then at me. It is over. Luca lived. For 2 weeks nobody promised it. Then one gray Tuesday he opened both eyes, insulted the soup, and asked whether Dante had yet learned the difference between strategy and self-destruction. Giulia cried in the hallway and denied it. Tommaso sent 3 bouquets to the hospital, each more offensive than the last. The third included a ribbon that read "You owe me $40. The city shifted after St. Bartholomew's. Vescari disappeared into federal custody, so fast it felt less like justice than accounting. The Bellini ledgers, copied and sealed through channels I was not allowed to name, turned 6 men respectable newspapers had once called benefactors into criminals with excellent tailoring. The old marriage covenant died with the registry fire. No more family transfers, no more brides used as signatures with pulse. Bellini Atelier reopened in April. Smaller storefront, better light. Same street, I chose the windows myself. That was the strangest part of surviving war. One day you were being dragged behind cutting tables while bullets hit glass. And 3 months later you were arguing over curtain rods, and whether peonies made a display look hopeful or desperate. Hopeful, Tommaso declared from the fitting platform, where he stood pretending not to model a tuxedo jacket Giulia was pinning for his cousin's wedding. It makes you look like a chandelier with feelings, Giulia said. He put a hand to his chest. This is flirting, I'm almost certain. She stabbed a pin into the lapel. This is tailoring. Don't romance yourself. I laughed so hard I had to set down the ledger book. Warmth had returned by inches in this new place. Giulia kept tea tins in my back room and acted irritated every time I thanked her. Tommaso visited daily under the pretense of deliveries, each excuse thinner than the last. Luca, once released, took the stool near the window and read case files like a gargoyle with blood pressure issues. And Dante came in most evenings at 6:20, never later if he could help it, pretending he was checking security when really he was making sure I had eaten. He still hadn't slept a full night without waking to check locks. I still noticed. One evening in early May, after Tommaso and Giulia left arguing about cufflinks and basil plants, I found Dante alone in the back workroom with my mother's thimble in his palm. He looked up when I entered. I should have asked before taking it from the evidence box. "It's yours if you want it." His gaze dropped to the thimble again. No, it was hers. "Then yours." The room smelled like starch, pressed silk, and the faint river air that came through the cracked back window at dusk. Bolts of ivory crepe lined the wall. My first real post-war commission, a midnight blue gown for a widow remarrying at 60, waited on the dress form between us. Dante set the thimble down beside the shears. "I brought something," he said. From the inside pocket of his jacket, he removed a flat envelope and placed it on the cutting table. I recognized legal paper before I touched it. Annulment release, civil severance. Every document required to dissolve the emergency marriage cleanly and restore my independent name without contest. I looked up too fast. Why? His face did not move, but I had learned to hear the pressure in his silence. "Because the war is over," he said. "Because I promised protection, not ownership. Because if you stay now, I need it to be without debt." The sentence opened something in me so sharply it almost hurt. "You think I'm still here out of debt. I think I'm a man who gave you very little room at the beginning." His voice lowered. "I won't make the same sin look noble by calling it fate." I stared at the papers until the lines blurred. This was his proposal, not a ring first, not romance smoothed over for comfort, a door, open. And him standing beside it, waiting to learn whether I would leave. Dante he had killed for less than the tremor in her fingers on that envelope. If she took the papers and chose daylight, he would put guards on her block for the rest of his life and never let her know. If she stayed, he would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve the catastrophe of that mercy. She opened the envelope, read every page, then set it down untouched and looked at him in a way no one else ever had, straight through the shape he used to survive and into the wound underneath. "I'll sign one thing," she said softly. "Not this." He didn't breathe. I stepped closer. "Then what?" Her throat moved. She was nervous. I knew because she started to say something twice and stopped both times. Then very quietly, a real vow, one made when neither of us is bleeding. The air in the workroom changed. I had never been the one to step first. That night I did. I took the papers, folded them once and set them aside. Then I touched her face with both hands, slowly enough that she could have turned away. She didn't. Her lashes lowered. Her breath shook. "You understand what I am," I said. "Yes. You understand what my life asks of anyone near it." "Yes." My thumbs brushed the corners of her mouth. "Then choose carefully, little Stitch." She gave a small, broken laugh. "I think I already did. I just needed you to stop deciding it for me." There was no church this time, no audience. No war at the door, only the low light of the workroom and my mother's old thimble beside the shears and the sound of the city settling outside. "I choose you," I said. The words came rougher than I expected. Her eyes filled instantly. "I know." When I kissed him, it was not like the warehouse. No panic, no blood, no relief sharp enough to cut. This was slower. Worse in its own way, because he could have stopped and didn't. His mouth moved over mine like a promise learning how to be gentle. One hand slid to the back of my neck. The other rested at my waist, steady and warm and unhurried. I felt every place he chose restraint even now, and the fact of it undid me more thoroughly than hunger ever could have. When we drew apart, he leaned his forehead to mine. "June," he said. "What about June? We marry again in June, in daylight, with a priest who isn't terrified." I laughed against his mouth. From the front of the shop, Luca's dry voice carried back without looking up from his stool. For the record, Father Benedetto is terrified now too. Dante closed his eyes briefly. I smiled. Ordinary life had arrived so quietly, I almost missed how radical it was. At closing time, he zipped my coat to my throat before we stepped into the evening. This time, I leaned into his hand. "Come home," he said softly. And when he called me Little Stitch then, it sounded like the safest place I had ever been. 9 months after the church, I stood in the upstairs room above Bellini Atelier with my hair lifted off my neck and June light spilling gold across the floorboards. The dress was not white. I had already worn white once for survival, and once in memory. This time I chose silk the color of late champagne, with pearl lilies at the spine, and hidden interior, stitching strong enough to hold a woman through any weather. My mother would have approved of the engineering and pretended to disapprove of the sentiment. Behind me, Dante's hands found the zipper. The sound of it, the soft metallic whisper at the nape of my neck, moved through me like a second heartbeat. "Slowly," I said, smiling at my own reflection. "You're catching my mother's beadwork." His hand stopped. In the mirror I saw his face change. Not by much, he was still Dante. Still built of control, quiet danger, and the discipline of a man who had survived himself badly before he survived anyone else. But 9 months had taught me his smallest truths. The pause in his fingers, the way grief crossed his eyes now without turning to stone, the fact that love had not made him softer exactly. It had made him more willing to be seen before he sealed the door again. "Serafina," he said, and my name in his mouth still felt like a room closing around warmth. I turned on the stool to face him. He stood there in a black suit cut close to the body I knew too well now, scar at the shoulder from the warehouse, another near the ribs from years before me. Rosary tucked inside the jacket pocket, on days Lucia felt near. The sun found the silver at his cufflink and the old sadness at the edge of his composure. "What?" I asked. His knuckles brushed the line of pearls at my spine. "You still do it. Do what? Hold still when the world is trying to frighten you." His gaze dropped briefly to the dress, then back to my face. "You still protect the work first." The room went quiet. Below us, I could hear chairs being arranged in the shop for the small ceremony, Giulia giving orders sharp enough to wound. Tommaso arguing that boutonnieres were an emotional ambush against men with broad chests. Luca, finally healed enough to stand without bitterness, telling them both to stop dramatizing flowers. I smiled through a sudden ache behind my eyes. "I suppose I do." He took one step closer. "It still lands the same," he said quietly. There it was, the bookend, the truth. The thing he had seen first and never really escaped. "What does it cost you now?" I asked. The question lived between us for a long second, long enough for the light to move on the wall. Long enough for me to hear my own pulse and not hate it. Then he answered in the only way he ever answered what mattered most. Plainly. "It costs me the part of me that believed gentleness always loses." I could not speak after that, not immediately, so I reached for his tie instead and straightened it with trembling fingers. "That sounds expensive." "It is." "Good," I whispered, because my voice had gone fragile in the face of too much feeling. "I'd hate to marry a man who came cheap." The corner of his mouth changed. Then he bent and kissed my forehead, exactly where he had once kissed me in a church full of fear. Only now there was sun through the curtains, and no locked doors, and no man missing from the altar, and no contract disguised as salvation. Only the life we had built after choosing it with open eyes. Downstairs, the ceremony lasted 11 minutes. Father Benedetto was still terrified, though better dressed. Giulia cried openly and called it dust. Tommaso cried more openly and blamed basil allergies, despite there being no basil anywhere in the building. Luca stood to Dante's left with one hand resting over the old scar at his side, as if reminding the wound it had lost. When Dante said his vows this time, his voice did not sound like steel. It sounded like a man setting down a weapon and discovering his hand remembered how. When I said mine, I did not say survival anywhere in them. Afterward, we did not host a grand reception. We ate lemon cake in the workroom. Giulia kissed Tommaso on the cheek when she thought no one was watching, and he went so silent with joy that Luca asked whether he needed medical attention. The city moved outside, deliveries rolled past, someone laughed in the street, ordinary things, precious things. That night, after everyone left and the flowers drooped in the jars, and the last dish dried on the rack, Dante locked the front door and came upstairs to the apartment we had taken above the atelier. Our apartment, my shoes lay abandoned by the sofa, his jacket hung over the chair. Through the open window came summer air carrying river damp, distant traffic, and the faint sweetness of somebody's late-blooming roses in the courtyard below. I stood at the bedroom mirror lifting my hair again. He came behind me without a word. His hands found the zipper. This time the sound made me smile before it made me ache. He drew it down slowly, the same gesture as that first impossible day and nothing like it at all. Pearl by pearl, inch by inch, the dress loosened under his careful hand. When the zipper reached the small of my back, he pressed one kiss to the place where metal met skin. "Little stitch," he murmured. Warm now, entirely. I leaned back into him. The truth I could not quite solve, even after war, after vows. After the quiet miracle of dishes in the rack and his shoes beside mine, was whether loving a man shaped by violence redeemed anything at all. Or whether it simply taught two people how to build tenderness inside the shadow of what could not be undone. I still did not know, perhaps I never would, but I knew this. When he had first touched the zipper at my spine, I had mistaken him for the end of my life. He was not the end. He was the man who stood behind me, now in a room full of June dark and ordinary breath, unmaking a dress carefully because he had learned that care was not weakness, and that love, earned slowly, paid for honestly, chosen in daylight, could sound as small as a zipper closing or opening at the nape of a woman's neck. And sometimes that was enough to change everything. Would you have chosen Dante and let the old world burn for the chance to save the man inside it?